Welcome, everyone. I'm Gay Stevenson, and we are in Victoria all week for CUI Local Victoria, a Canadian Urban Institute project in partnership with the City of Vancouver. City of Victoria, oh my gosh, how did I do that? I'm from Vancouver, apologies. The City of Victoria and the Victoria Foundation. I'm here acknowledging and respecting the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the City of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wisanic people whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. And we had a fantastic tour yesterday, all along some of those lands, learning more about it. Through CUI Local, CUI is connecting with cities across Canada to gather interpretations of data, assessments, priorities, bright spots, and stories from on the ground, voices to help deepen our collective understanding of the interconnected issues facing urban Canada. We worked with the City of Victoria and the Victoria Foundation to organize these visits, involving a combination of public and invitation-only meetings and activities. Our team of CUI staff have descended upon Victoria, and we're having a fabulous time meeting all of you and looking at the local issues and connecting with them nationally, and to strengthen the connective tissue within and across communities, coast to coast to coast. Some of you of the staff are in the audience here. You can give a wave. And to those of you who don't know us at CUI, we're the Canadian Urban Institute, a national platform that houses the best in Canadian city building, where policymakers, urban professionals, civic and business leaders, community activists, and academics can learn and share and collaborate with one another from coast to coast. Let's talk a little housekeeping here, because this is an event that's happening in person and also online. So for those of you that are here in person at the Victoria Convention Center, thank you so much for being here. It's so lovely, isn't it, to be surrounded by people, to be outdoors and together again. We trust you to be safe by keeping your masks on while moving around the center. And for those of you who are joining us online, it's also lovely to see you. We'll be speaking to you in the chat, and feel free to use it to tell us where you're joining from, and to ask us questions, make comments, and have a discussion there. We'll be digging deeply into the chat during this session to guide our conversation and to ask the panelists questions. For everyone, these sessions are being recorded and the chat will be saved. If you need closed captioning, look to the bottom of your screen or ask for help in the chat box. Before I pass over to our moderator, I do want to bring everyone's attention over to this recently launched Victoria Foundation Vital Signs Report. Copies are available at the desk as you go out, and they're also available online, and we will pop the link to those reports into the chat. So without any further ado, I would like to pass this over to our host, Professor David Millward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for coming. And also on behalf of my colleagues and students to my left, we also wish to acknowledge with gratitude that we're on the territory of the Lekwungen peoples. And now I'll just spend a couple of minutes relating what the theme of this talk is. So we're all, in one way or another, part of the world's first ever joint Indigenous law degree program. Now, a lot of law schools in Canada, they teach only Canadian law on various subjects. And there is McGill, which teaches both Quebec's civil tradition and Canadian common law side by side. And we've taken that a little further, and that is we've developed our joint Indigenous law degree program. Part of it is that a lot of our courses, we teach Canadian law side by side with the laws of various Indigenous legal orders within the same courses. But another key part, and this is the focus of our discussion tonight, is the field schools, which is a very important part of our program, where it involves students and instructors living in and being part of an Indigenous community and learning how the laws of an Indigenous legal order operate on a day-to-day basis. And although there were some challenges with this recent rendition of the field school on account of COVID, naturally, as there would be for everyone else, but part of the idea of the field schools is that to get across or to teach students that law isn't just words in a statute or what a judge says, that for other peoples, it's a lived daily experience from the moment you get up and everything you do throughout the day and until the moment you go to bed. So, and in that respect, I also wish to thank the Victoria Foundation, because they funded an early rendition of the field school, which was done in association with the Wasanich peoples. And although that wasn't yet part of the official JID program, it helped inform a lot of what we're doing nowadays. So it was an early prototype project that helped us develop the field schools component of the JID program. So now on that point, I'll also introduce my colleagues from right to left. So immediately to my left is Sarah Morales, who is a member of the Cowichan peoples, but she's also a law professor along with me as part of the JID program. And and our recent field school did involve a cooperative partnership between the Cowichan peoples and the law school at the University of Victoria. To her left is Professor Brian Thom, who's a professor of anthropology here at the University of Victoria. And the idea that law is just some sort of silo unto itself. Law draws from all kinds of other social factors, which means that laws can't just be treated as a discipline by itself. It has to interact or draw from the perspectives of other disciplines, which is why someone like Professor Thom is so valuable. And immediately to Brian's left is Thomas Hawthorne, who is one of our earliest students of the JID program, and he's going to graduate this year, as well as to his left, Jolene Sheeny, who's also one of the original cohorts or one of the original students of the program, is also going to graduate this year. And so on that point, we'll dive right into things. And as I alluded to previously, the most recent rendition of the field school involved a partnership between the Cowichan peoples and the Law School of Victoria. So Professor Morales, how did that partnership get started? How did it develop?
Hi, David. So I'm going to start by introducing myself in Hulkaminam. So I square Entha Satahuya Tinitzen at Cowichan. So my Hulkaminam name is Satahuya, also known as Sarah Morales, and I am a member of Cowichan Tribes. And really it was that relationality and the relationship that my dear friend and colleague Brian Thom has in working with Cowichan Tribes for over 20 years that led to this opportunity for us to partner with them. As David spoke about, it was during the time of COVID that we were tasked with this almost seemingly unsurmountable challenge of putting on an experiential learning opportunity for our students in partnership with a community. And in community-based work, there's always at the outset hopes of doing it in a respectful and good way. But that took on particular challenges during the time of COVID. And so we're really grateful for the close connections that we have with Cowichan Tribes, close friends and relatives who are in positions of decision-making and provided us with opportunities to have conversations with them about the opportunity to do this work with that nation. And I might add, until I think 1 or 2 weeks before we actually entered the field, Cowichan Tribes was under a shelter-in-place order because of a COVID outbreak in the community. So it was a very delicate balance, but also just wanted to recognize the generosity of Cowichan Tribes, even though they were dealing with very substantial hardships and challenges within the community, all during COVID, but especially starting in the new year. They were very diligent and generous in working with us, and thought that this type of educational experience was so necessary, not only for future lawyers, but also as something that they would like to see available for their students as well. So just want to take a few minutes to just acknowledge the challenging place that Cowichan Tribes was in at the time, and also stand them up and recognize them for their strength and hospitality and strong will, and in helping us enable this to come to pass. So if you are not familiar with Cowichan Tribes, they are a nation located in the Cowichan Valley, so just 45 minutes north of here, and they have about 5,200 members. So they're the largest single First Nation in British Columbia. And they have been working to exercise their rights and jurisdiction over their traditional territories since settlers arrived, but in a concerted effort through the treaty process since 1993. Through their work in the treaty process, in the modern day treaty process, they've also taken on other initiatives to help ensure that their jurisdiction, their footprint is within the territory, and is working to create a brighter future for their children and families in the community. So Brian and I both worked with the whole Community Treaty Group, which was the treaty organization of which Cowichan Tribes is a part of. And through that work, we knew that there was several initiatives that Cowichan Tribes had been working on that we thought maybe our students could be of help or use for. We also, because of our relationship and my membership in Cowichan Tribes, knew that there's other governance initiatives. I think they're coming up to 1 year of ratifying their land code, the Cowichan Tama. They just reached an agreement on education jurisdiction, and it's going to vote in the community. And for the past 10 years, they've been involved in a process to try and get laws around children and families. So needless to say, because of Brian's and I's relationship, we thought that this might be a good fit where we'd have an opportunity for our students to be involved in some of the projects that we knew Cowichan Tribes was working on. We met with various committees, chief and council. Brian and I both very much wanted to ensure that the work was driven by Cowichan Tribes, and felt that Cowichan Tribes should lead the projects and have students engaged with them, and didn't want them to be just sort of shadows of a research agenda that we had in our minds. And so with that sort of governance structure for the field school, we created pods for students to be a part of based on subject matters. So we had students in a lands pod, students in a culture and heritage pod, a governance pod, a child and family pod, and then we also had students working with the Aboriginal Coalition to end homelessness. We then, Brian and I took supervisory roles in partnership with the lead organizations, whether it was a department at Cowichan Tribes or the whole Community Treaty Group or delegated agencies in helping students meet goals and deliverables that those nations and organizations set out. So that really was the first part of the field school. In January, we're not in a position with COVID in the Cowichan Valley to actually send students to be in person in meetings during that time. And so for about the first 8 weeks or so, the students were matched into projects based on their experience and expertise, and we worked with them in that way.
Now, there's also this idea that law and place are integrally bound to each other. So a narrow view that might be familiar to our own experience is statutes are issued by a parliament in Ottawa, or provincial laws are issued by the legislature just a block away. But sometimes that can encapsulate a somewhat narrow view of law. And sometimes this living relationship between law and place can be much more extensive than that. So on that note, I also have a question for Brian. So Brian has a lot of experience with a place called Yayumnuts. So Brian, feel free to explain your experiences.
Thanks, David. And thank you everybody for being here in person and online. Anthipa Brian Tom, Taninsin at Tsalich. My name's Brian Tom. I'm a professor in the anthropology department. I'm from Cordova Bay, just in the municipality north of here. And I've had the great opportunity to work at this amazing place in the Cowichan Valley called Yayumnuts. Those of you who are in the room with us are probably seeing slides behind me here of what this place looks like. This is an ancestral site that has an archaeological record of over 2,000 years that Cowichan, through an initiative they started in 2017 as part of the Canada 150 celebrations to commemorate this remarkable ancestral site and share it with the larger community. So I thought David has opened up the opportunity to tell a little bit of the story of Yayumnuts here. So I thought I'd share a bit about this remarkable place where we located the second half of the field school. After the shelter-in-place order had fallen a week later, we were out with students at Yayumnuts every day, learning from the land and encountering Cowichan people in this ancestral site and thinking through the things that come up when we start to ask questions about Indigenous legal orders when we're at the land. And I'll tell a story that tries to connect it to urban issues, because I know this is what you guys are really interested in. Yayumnuts was preempted in a Crown grant back in 1876. And was farmed by a family for about 100 years. In the 1970s, it was bought by a land developer in Duncan, and the land developer started to, build cul-de-sacs and subdivisions following the program of the day through the 80s and into the early 90s. When they arrived at this place, which is right alongside Somenos Creek, a prominent creek that drains Somenos Lake and the Somenos Marsh area down into the Cowichan River. They were starting to put in the municipal infrastructure like sewer and water. They had dug a big trench through the site. And there was a medical doctor who was walking along a path that's along the creek that all the locals use even to this day. And he saw something that concerned him there in the back dirt of the trench that the workers were digging for the municipal services, the hookups. And so he called the RCMP. The RCMP confirmed that it wasn't a murder victim, but in fact, an ancient burial. And they had an archaeological assessment done by a consulting archaeology firm who said, well, we're 7 kilometers from the ocean here. We're nowhere near Cowichan River. This is probably just an incidental find and it's not too significant. This was in 1992. Cowichan Tribes administration at the time was not satisfied with that answer. They wanted a second opinion. They asked for a new team to come in, and In 1994, in the summer, I was part of a team of graduate students who was then working to answer the question, what is this place, and is it significant, and if there's any remains here, how could we mitigate through excavation to make way for the oncoming development, the subdivision that was going to occur at this place. We found remarkably that this wasn't an incidental find, that this was a large village site that had been occupied 2,000 years ago. There are 3 archaeological components to the site, a very ancient, the lowest levels being the evidence of the village site, where we found structures and pit cooking features, about 500 artifacts, many of the different kinds of faunal and floral remains that came from the food and the materials that people were consuming in their day-to-day village life at this place. And then a second component that after the village site, that area wasn't lived in on a day-to-day basis, people kept coming back there for another 600 years and using it as a cemetery. And so there are many burials that were found at that site, not just the one incidental burials, but over the course of the summer, I think we excavated around 36 individuals. We were working with Cowichan Tribes at the time, who was overseeing the project. Cowichan youth were working with us. And one day there was an elders group who came to visit, and they saw, all of these burials being removed. And it was very upsetting. I remember the day quite clearly, that people were crying. It's visibly disturbing to see bodies being exhumed in order to make way for another cul-de-sac. And they went back to the Cowichan administration and said, this can't carry on. Cowichan Tribes can't support this kind of urban development on private land in a suburban neighborhood in Duncan. You need to stop it. And so the archaeological work stopped. There was a ceremony held to rebury the dead and all of their belongings. And then Cowichan embarked on a 20-year journey to try to protect that place. There was development proposal after rezoning proposal after building permit requests, and all of these things that the private landowner was bringing forward to try to move his project forward. And Cowichan Tribes was very much at the forefront every time, saying, no, this can't happen here. This is an ancestral site. This is our special place. This is Yayumnuts. And so I got to hand it to the district municipality of North Cowichan, although they didn't, shut the project down, but they also didn't, say that they could go forward. And so the land developer kept having to come back with new proposals. The province was there, managing the sort of archaeology permits issues, and there was lots of questions that had to happen around, well, where exactly is the site and how extensive is it? And does it cover every square inch of the footprint of the property, or is it some smaller area? So we had ground penetrating radar going around the site, finding more subsurface anomalies that, were no doubt connected to other kinds of features that we hadn't yet exhumed at the site. You'll all know about ground penetrating radar, I'm sure, from news, more recent news. That's the same work that we were doing in those days. So this came to the treaty table many times, but of course it's private land, which is not on the table for treaty settlement. It wasn't a solution available. Finally, in around 2010 or so. So these events started in 1992. By about 2010, there was a naturalist who found a red listed endangered species along the creek near the site, federally red listed species, and they were able to document that. And that brought the federal government to the table with resources that then finally catalyzed an agreement between Cowichan and district municipality of North Cowichan, the province, the federal government, and the landowner. And so with a number of concessions the landowner was asking for developments elsewhere, and a purchase price for the property, the land is today Crown land managed by the province with some very solemn commitments around endangered species. And it's, of course, a Cowichan ancestral site. So Cowichan, to circle back to Canada 150 and the Cowichan's work today, this site is located within walking distance of 3 schools. As we all know, that there's a big work happening in our communities to introduce Indigenous ways of being and knowing and understanding of land-based learning in our school curriculum. And Cowichan wanted to have this place to commemorate this place and make it a place that children could come and think about the important things that come out when we go to a place like this. Think about the teachings, think about all of the things that are available to be learned about history, about colonialism, about the sort of ongoing tensions in the community, about the importance of truth before we get to reconciliation, if we want to talk about those sort of things. And so Cowichan, since 2017, has been leading initiative to develop curriculum, to improve the facility so that it, in terms of trails and protective fencing and some interpretive signage and so on, so that it can be a place for land-based learning. And that's really where we came in with the law school. We thought that if this is a good place for school children, this is going to be a great place for law students. Because when we start paying attention to the sort of, interlegalities of Coast Salish legal orders and what they demand of us at a place like this, and municipal law and provincial law, and just our own experiences of, being there and what we can do and how we should be relating and thinking about the ancestors, how we can be thinking about the kinds of things that the site has revealed to us about fishing, about hunting, about caring for the birds, caring for the dead, about the plants, and so on. It goes on. So many things open up for discussions around Indigenous legal orders. So I think Yemnuts had much to share with us, and we were very grateful to be there at that tentative moment during the COVID pandemic. Thanks, David.
Thank you, Brian. Okay, so for Thomas and Jolene, I have a deliberately open-ended question. How do you see coming to work in a good way?
Thank you very much, David. Hi, everybody. I'm Thomas Hawthorne. I'm originally from Nanaimo. I'm a member of the Squamish Nation in Vancouver, and I'm a 4th year JD student. Working in a good way. It's a concept that's difficult to pin down. Not that it's ambiguous, but I think it's really complex and really personal. It's not just understanding the importance of the work that you're doing, but it's implementing the teachings, not just in doing the work or implementing the teachings into the work. It's how you approach the work. And maybe that sounds simple, but I didn't understand it for a long time. As you guys know, I'm Coast Salish, raised on the island, and my family on my Indigenous side live in Vancouver. So I was raised away from them. And I saw them from time to time, but I didn't really have this importance of culture ingrained in me. And you can compound that on the fact that I jumped into law school a month after my undergrad. Like, I was a career student. I had this really rigid mindset that was, how do I get my assignments done? How do I optimize for this test? You don't look at things in a broad way. Everything is very specific. And I think this JID degree has been very helpful in moving me away from that. I'm definitely a lot closer to my roots. Before field school, I've actually moved to Vancouver onto the reserve. I spent a lot of time with my family. And during the the Zoom away from person portion of the field school, I did it also from the reserve, and it sparked a really genuine interest. But working in a good way, I still didn't quite get it until the field school. Working with Cowichan Tribes, it was so eye-opening. There's these complexities and hardships, struggles. And throughout all of this, they're still passing teachings down to you. I mean, the resilience and the inspiration, I can't thank Cowichan Tribes enough for it. I mean, these teachings, at the time, I saw them as strokes of a paintbrush. But it wasn't until Nuts that I actually saw the canvas. On the first day, I walked away with this overwhelming sense of peace. And it was unbelievable. I've never felt that way in my entire life. And I woke up in the morning and that sense of peace was still there. And this yearning to learn more and feel accepted and just all these really positive feelings, they were still there. And they continued through the entire experience and honestly continue to this day. That rigid mindset, it's gone. You know, I move carefully, deliberately. I see things holistically and I see connections in places I never did before. I move with more open mind. And I think with my heart more than my head. And I always try to stay teachable. These are fundamental aspects of who I am today. And I learned that at field school from elders and knowledge keepers, passing these teachings down every single day, learning from Nuts, the land, a place that still has so much power in teaching. And the thing with understanding working in a good way is you approach it with, in my opinion, potentially a mindset like that, but can always be built upon. You know, it's in the experiences, you know, it's in the teachings. It's in that sense of peace. You know, working in a good way, it's not just to work in a good way. It's walking in a good way. It's to live in a good way. And that's how I came to understand working in a good way.
Hi, my name's Jolene Ashney. I come from a reserve in Labrador called the Shadjidinu First Nation. And the question, I think, of coming to know and understand how to work in a good way, growing up on reserve, I think it's comparable to our notion of working and doing everything that you have in a way of respect. So from the beginning of 1L, when we had first met Sarah, and her coming in and saying, like, this is how my people work. And you always need to remember that, number one, we're always learning. And so that's something that I think that I've always taken with me as I go across. And she put working in a good way on our radar from her very first class that she taught. And so that's something that, like, I'm quite thankful for, because, like, it was something that I knew to be aware of. And then as we went through each year and we had classes learning Coast Salish material, I find that you would notice more and more of what working in a good way meant and how to present yourself, how to work in these sort of situations. And I think it was with the field school and then Nuts, it's on our second day of orientation. An elder named Mina came to present to us, and she had reiterated, as Thomas had said, working with both your heart and your mind in everything that you do. And that's something that I took from the very beginning as, like, a very positive impact on me, because she said that the mind and the heart cannot work independently. And that's so true, because you can work with your mind, but you're not taking into consideration the impacts of what your work is doing. And if you work with only your heart, then your logic is gone. And so these comparative notions of working with both your heart and your mind succinctly, I think, is something that I find very valuable. And then all of these things, whether, like, we had Coast Salish presenters or not during our first orientation period, I started noticing that everybody had sort of unintentionally or intentionally mentioned working with your heart and your mind, working in a good way, and how there were experiences of where they hadn't worked in a good way. And then when we got to Yumnuts, we had another elder, James Charlie, come and talk to us. And one of the things that he mentioned is that the laws for the Cowichan people adapt. They run with the air, the water, the land. And the air and the water, the land, those things don't stop changing. They don't stop moving. So the Coast Salish people have been very prominent in adapting to whatever hurdles present in their way. So instead of being halted by this one hurdle in front of you, they're adapting. So despite seeing the negative consequences, working in a good way means approaching that obstacle, but then also going forward and moving past it and adapting. And so there's so many things that we've learned and we've just seen throughout the field school. I think it was probably the most prominent and powerful part. And Thomas and I were in our pod, our lands pod together. And so we got to work with the lands department. And I think that was something so meaningful because our first meeting, we would have weekly meetings with them on Thursdays. And our first meeting, we would be welcomed with open arms. We were treated as one of the staff. And like, we would just hear the COVID numbers, like the COVID numbers in community rising, and like the things that they're working through, and they're completely understaffed because a lot of the staff members were out working checkpoints, were out trying to help facilitate in areas that weren't even their specialty. And so we would start every meeting with a saying of thanks or sending positive energy, not necessarily a prayer, but to just get us in a good place. And that's something that I've seen, I guess, working now with Cowichan people and witnessing all of these talks that I've been to, is that you start on a good foot, despite the hurdles in front of you. You start opening the doors and opening your heart. And another person that we had worked with, Wayne, he had always mentioned opening your heart to whatever's happening, because your learning never stops. Reiterating again what Sarah had said from the very beginning in first year of law. And so I think for us, like getting to experience what we did in our specific group, working with the lands department and getting to see the successes and the failures every week, and then also being acknowledged that we weren't just students and they weren't just babysitting us, but to also get our opinions and to get our notions of like what we think, to check in with us. It was a very profound moment. And so I feel that working in a good way is just a mindset that you need to have going forward. Working in a good way is taking into consideration that, you know, for me as a First Nations person, also being humble to myself and checking myself whenever I need to, because this is not my First Nation. I have other principles that I carry with me, but once I step into the door of another First Nation, those have to be gone, because then I'm using my mind to openly interact with the First Nation and not just having my bias and opinions steer me in an indirect way. So I think like working in a good way can mean a lot of things.
So this question, and now that you have some experience under your belts, and this question is not by any means an invitation for any negative reflection on people you may have worked with, but do you have a sense of what you might wish to see in future renditions of the field schools? And this is a question for the panel at large.
I think despite it being a pandemic, we were able to learn a lot. And I think that just going forward in field schools, that these students and the next cohorts coming through are going to learn so much more, because we got a full platter of knowledge delivered to us. And I'm so thankful for that. But that was just through a screen. And I can only imagine now going forward that the in-person field schools, once the pandemic has sort of subsided and the new normal happens, that if they're actually able to go into community, that there's going to be just so much to offer. So I don't think I necessarily have any sort of like going into the future, what can I offer? I think it's just that working with First Nations communities, you have to be prepared for everything, because often the last thing on community members' minds is getting the thing done. There are so many tragedies happening within communities that we need to be very cognizant of. And so it's sort of, you land in the community and you don't often know where you'll be. And so I think it's great to take these field schools with a very open mind of what the community has to offer.
Well, I think this experience is critical for lawyers who want to practice in this area of law. Indigenous law is not the same as Canadian law. You learn from the world around you, from oral histories, from elders and knowledge keepers. You don't get that in a legal database online anywhere. As we move towards self-governance, these laws derived from the land passed down for generations and spoken to in oral histories, they're going to become more prevalent. And the land is still there. Indigenous law is still alive and well, and you can see it even at UVIC. And I think without a fundamental understanding of the medium of Indigenous law, it's really, really difficult to engage with it. And this field school is an incredible opportunity to learn how to do that. And I mean, you can be taught this in a classroom, but like I said, you won't get it unless you already have it, in which case it's a great thing. It builds upon your understanding. But this field school, it sets a foundation for that learning to be built upon. So I strongly, strongly encourage future legal practitioners to find opportunities such as this and engage with them.
I'm just thinking about time, and when we were operating this field school under the COVID conditions, we had a lot of difficult, challenging constraints to keep ourselves safe and our partners at Cowichan safe. And I think that in a post-COVID world, when we're able to reconnect and be in person again with a little more time, I would love to be able to have the opportunity for the reflection of the insights that happen through the kind of work that we did together outdoors, in place, back into the complex environment that Cowichan Tribe is operating in, working to mobilize its Indigenous legal orders in a trans-systemic kind of environment. Because I think given the time that we had, we circled back a little tiny bit, but we didn't get a chance to circle back in a full way. And so I think as the field school carries on, I really look forward to seeing us work to deepen the threads between the insights you get from around Indigenous legal orders from these kind of land-based experiences and the practical everyday work that Indigenous communities are engaged in implementing those laws in an everyday way today.
I agree with that. In fact, in thinking about reflecting on Yamnets, like giving myself some time because of this panel to think about that experience, I thought about how different my experience was because we were there for 3 weeks, Brian and I. And so we had sort of this deepening of understanding. We chose, I mean, Yamnets is a special place. So we would go there regardless, but it also, we chose it because of the situation of COVID. We were able to sort of remain contained, have access to a bunch of different sites, and sort of, it was a perfect jumping off point. I was thinking about how we experience place, but place also experiences us. And just as we're transformed by place, place is transformed by us. And I saw that in Yamnets over those 3 weeks. And I think Brian and I have had conversations. I'm not sure if it was as perceptible to the students. But just I saw how our Cowichan members, our elders who were there, began to take ownership of that place in a different way and occupy that place. And we'd see them on days that they weren't scheduled to visit us, and they came visiting their friends and they were showing them signs. And at first, a lot of the neighborhood individuals had a lot of questions about why we were there and what we were doing there. In fact, an RCMP officer visited us one morning to sort of ask similar questions. But by occupying that space, I believe that we made it a more Cowichan space. And so I would like to think about that going forward in field schools. How can we occupy places and spaces that are significant to these Indigenous communities who we're working with, that our privilege allows us to occupy or permits us to occupy and allows us to foster a new relationship to that place that might not be afforded, be it not for the backing of, the university or professor or doctor titles. That definitely did come into play when we explained why we were there. So I'd like in further field schools to have those conversations with the community about what are places that you are not able to access that you would like access to, or what are sites that are important to you that you would like to rekindle a relationship to, and how can we be a part of that. So I know you asked for something that we would change. That I loved about our field school, and I'd actually like to implement it in other places. Hichka.
So we do have about 10 minutes left. So if anyone in the gala or online has any questions, and if you need it, I can bring the mic over.
Hi, my name is Anne Relier, and I happen to have moved from Ontario with my husband. Our place of living is right on the Songhees Reserve in Seniors Park there. We arrived about 7 years ago and from Ontario, and hadn't really paid much attention to Indigenous issues until we got here. And I joined Dogwood, and I found out how everybody is fighting for the land, air, and water to be part of everybody's right. And so we ended up protesting the pipeline and getting arrested and sentenced, and the TMX I'm talking about. And my question is, we've been following the court cases of arrestees since 2018, and particularly the First Nations elders, Stacy and Will, George, and Jim, I forget his last name, and how from the beginning, the court cases, including 160 of us first arrestees in 2018, there has been no acceptance of Indigenous law or Indigenous issues about their land, particularly the Tsleil-Waututh. And I'm just hoping that you're indicating with your field school and I didn't get what the GID stood for, but it's a combined law study, right, of Indigenous and that there's going to be hope for future court cases in front of Supreme Court judges to take on these laws of the territories. And otherwise, I don't know what we would do. So I'm not sure I phrased a question, but Could you speak on that, please?
Yeah, so I think exactly what your hope for is our hope of what the JD joint degree accomplishes. First, a recognition that Indigenous law exists, that it has a rightful place alongside common law and civil law in the Canadian legal system, and thinking critically about what is the relationship between those legal orders. So Tsleil-Waututh Nation, in response to the Trans Mountain Pipeline, created their own environmental assessment process. And it's online, I believe it's called Sacred Trust. If you Google there, you can see their assessment. But in it, their assessment draws on Tsleil-Waututh law, on Coast Salish legal principles around responsibilities and rights in framing and creating new standards by which to judge whether or not a proponent's development should be deemed accessible. So there you see right there, right? An Indigenous nation drawing out their own law, creating standards and processes, and trying to fit it within the Canadian legal system. Our hope is that these fabulous young students will then take what they've learned and start drawing out Indigenous law and the work that they do, whether that be, as litigants for First Nations, working as in-house counsel, even government policy workers, that we will start to just infiltrate the Canadian legal system with Indigenous laws and legal orders in the ways that communities, their clients guide them to do that. And that will create new standards and processes for judgment, which will transform the Canadian legal system in a good way. Does anyone else have any?
Just to add to that, at the end of this year, there will be 23 of us released to the world to go out and do our thing. I can't speak for all the other classmates in my cohort, but I myself have gotten articles with a law firm, and it's an Aboriginal law firm only, so it only represents First Nations. So I will definitely use the tools that I've gained in this program to do the good work for the First Nations that we represent, which are quite a number of them, sort of like east of the Rockies. But it's our hope that, I don't know where everybody else will go, but in a sense that we'll be released and use our minds and our hearts and work with those. And then the next year after that, we have about 17 will be released to the world, and then so on and so forth, because as of right now, there's 4 cohorts. And I believe at our celebration that we had when we returned to school, I think we're now in over 100 of us in our 4 years. So hopefully we'll be able to, like Sarah said, infiltrate the system and sort of draw on our tools that we've got in our toolkit.
Okay, with 5 minutes left, we have time for one more question, I believe.
Thank you. I'm Senator McCollum from Manitoba. And I met this young lady and she invited me to come. And working in the Senate as I'm a Cree woman, and it's been very difficult because it is very colonialistic. And Canada has never had its own laws. We've imported them from Britain. And I'm wondering if there is any way we could get advice on how we can challenge the system that exists, because we keep passing laws, federal laws that don't, where there's provincial jurisdiction. And for me, treaties are involved and people keep falling in that interjurisdictional gap. I think that's one of the more urgent issues that I see. So I'm wondering if there's anything, any way that your group can help parliamentarians, senators especially, to deal with legislation, with, while until all of you wonderful, wonderful people come out. Thank you.
Well, that would make for an amazing field school in itself for students to work with senators, but definitely there are ways to push forward. I know that the new UNDRIP legislation in BC, the DRIPA legislation, it's creating opportunities to look at laws that are being passed and see that they are in line with the UNDRIP. And I know in the work that Brian does, that I do, like we're critically looking to see if they actually are creating space for Indigenous laws and legal orders, and space for Indigenous laws and legal orders to define standards and practices in a way that is meeting Canada's international human rights obligations and obligations to Indigenous peoples. I think what you're talking about specifically might warrant a conversation between our dean and you. But I definitely think that the academics who are working in this field, as David said, my colleague said, there's lots of good academics in other fields as well at UVic who are turning their minds to this. One of the strengths, I think, of this field school was just the opportunity for Brian and I to work together in an interdisciplinary format to show that law crosses boundaries and culture is imperative to law, and to have those conversations. But I think that there's always a way for interests to align, and we saw that in the field school here, is seeing what the need is in the community and hoping to find a synergy there, because Brian and I and many of us at UVic feel that community-based research and experiential opportunities should always be driven by the community and never a burden on the community. So if there is a need there and a want, I'm sure that synergies can be created through the JID or Circle or other research institutes that we have.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit to that. I think also, when speaking from experience in my own course, I do think that a lot of students kind of have eye-opening moments where they realize that not only can Indigenous legal orders be just as nuanced and sophisticated as Canadian law, but sometimes, you really start to think about maybe those Indigenous legal orders provide better answers to certain problems than Canadian law does. And I do know, like, Jolly and Thomas were both in my first year course, and not them specifically, but there are very often occasions where really, and students would have that kind of moment where there's something about some perspective in Indigenous legal orders they hadn't thought of before, and then they actually started to mull it and think it over. And that's what we hope that our graduates are going to do when they go out. So we give it to them in the classroom, and we hope they can take the torch or the baton and start doing the same thing out in the world. And now the question is, can we achieve that critical mass where we really start to, well, that's what we're always hoping for.